Oh, okay. Well, we're back on. You were telling a story with Carol Kane.
Carol Kane was the
Andy
lady.
Kaufman.
Carol Kane and Danny and Andy Kaufman. It's just an interesting story because I directed a man that I've never met in my life, and I still never did, and then he passed away, and I felt so bad. But he literally did his. We couldn't start the film rolling until he finished his meditation. Jim Brooks was very respectful of his process. And he had no blocking, really. He just stood there and did a whole bunch of jokes, and in his accent, and Carol was in the scene, I think, and maybe Judd Hirsch and Danny. And we'd camera blocked it with this stand, and bam, he was in, and we had no pickups in that scene to do. He was gone, and before I was able to go, hi, so I never met him, but he's in that episode. It's so interesting. Chris Lloyd, it was basically about Chris Lloyd, and Chris was wonderful about rehearsing, and so was Mary Lou Henner. The rest of them, boom, it just was school's out, and and that was my only taxi. Plus, in there, I had done very little at the time, and I had camera problems and Jimmy, of course, is so incredible with cameras and so fast and stuff, and I was slow. And they didn't, it's just, oh, please, come on, keep going. But I got through it. And the interesting thing is you learn so much from those kind of experiences. You don't realize it at the time, but I realized if I'm going to make a living in this business, I better damn well learn the cameras, learn how to work with actors who only want to work for 15 minutes on a scene. And that's part of the survival in our business is learning to think on your feet and having had a lot of experience. So if you are, and I'll go on to moonlighting, but if you're given a scene, especially a single camera, bam, like that, and you've never read the scene at all, and you're going to film it in an hour, and those actors are going to learn it in an hour, and the cinematographer's going to light it, and you're going to block it, you better know what the heck you're doing, or trust your instincts, very much. So anyway.
Another show I wanted to ask about was Give Me a Break. I know you.
Oh my God!
First part of that.
One of the best episodes I ever did. She's gone too. Jeez, she drove me crazy because it was a love-hate relationship, and she had a lot of baggage with her, Nell Carter, talking about. But I loved her, and it wasn't the greatest show in the world. But one episode that I happened to do involved her dying father. And she had to go to, she couldn't decide. She had a very bad relationship with her father on the show. Couldn't decide whether to go down and visit him, see him or not. No. And it turns out he dies. She never goes to visit him. So she goes to the funeral. So here's Will, Mr. White Wasp from Rhode Island, directing an all-black funeral. Oh, my God. And she is laughing at me, Mr. Honky's going to direct this black funeral. So we do it, and I get through it, and she's going to sing Amazing Grace, and she won't sing it until tape is rolling. That's a song that's special to me. So we doing the dress rehearsal in front of an audience, too. And she gets up and starts Amazing Grace, a cappella, and I started crying in the booth. At the whole crew, we could hardly get through the shots because it was so moving and so emotional. And the episode just turned out to be a classic. I mean, of these silly give me a breaks, and suddenly we're doing this. And I don't know whether she got nominated for that or what, but it was truly exciting. She was such a volatile person, dear woman who had lots of demons and things. But Dolph Sweet I loved, and the girls, and it was Helen Hunt's, I think, first television job. She played part of the rock band, that the oldest daughter got a rock band going. And had a couple of girls, and Helen Hunt was one of the girls. So it was that was a fun show. And that was in the booth, 4-camera tape in the booth. And when I think back on those days, I liked that kind of, because it isolated you. You'd have room for maybe 2 or 3 writer-producers behind you. But now you'd get a mob around the monitors. I mean, there are shows that I've done recently where you literally have to have video village, 2 video villages, one with your immediate exec producers, because if you only have one, then everybody's coming around. And you got 30 people standing around, and they can't keep quiet. And they're all right there within a shot of the microphone. And this audio mixer will have to stop. I'm sorry, I'm hearing so much conversation at the video village that... So, like on Reba recently, we would make another place for the other execs, the lesser writer-producers, and the network and the studio people. But otherwise, they'll just gather around, which, you'd have in those days, but they weren't allowed because the booth was too small, and that was kind of nice.
And give me a break. That was sort of the veteran guys like Mort Lockman and...
Yes, it was. Mort Lockman, who was wonderfully kind to me. I'm trying to remember what the heck I did with him, but I worked with him on something with Norman Lear, because I met him through Norman Lear. And Norman Lear...
It was Archie Bunker's place.
Yes, that's right. Okay. And Norman Lear was the one that said after, I think it was my first or second job after the Bob Newhart show, said, if you'll come and spend 6 weeks with Jack Shea on the Jeffersons, just observing, I will give you an episode of this show, and maybe 2, 2 more, maybe 3. Well, I got the Archie Bunker. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I did one of those. That went quite well, I think. By that time, I was more confident and stuff.
And you did a couple of shows with Stockard Channing?
Oh, I did a lot with Stockard. That's right.
How were those experiences?
Good for you, Gary. That was fabulous experience because, again, I'd replaced a couple of more technical directors, and Stockard was an actress and unbelievably bright. In fact, I said sometimes Stockard is too bright for her own good, and which is a compliment. But she analyzed the scripts, and she wanted to analyze the scripts, and sometimes the scripts are a little too light to be heavily gone into, but she loved to talk acting, and we got along absolutely fabulous. So I took over and did most of her first series, and then she did a second series too. She did one with Ron Silver. I think that was the first series she did, and then she had another one that she did with Garrett Graham and a couple others. But yeah, that was at KTLA, and very pleasant. I mean, I don't think they were that successful, but I met I think Randy Cordray, who became one of my favorite ADs on that show, and his wife at the time was Gail Mancuso, who's become a very successful television director. She was actually our phone page on WKRP in Cincinnati, and Gail's just done fantastically as a television director.
And did you actually do the pilot for Too Close for Comfort?
I did.
So what was the experience like? Was that your first pilot, maybe?
No. My first pilot was for Norman Lear, Mort Lockman, there. It was called, oh God, Julie Cobb, and, sorry. It was an airplane came through. If my wife were here, she'd know what it was, but I'm sorry, I can't remember it. But it was. I was doing WKRP in Cincinnati, and the stage manager was going with the lady who, with her partner, Brad Buckner, and anyway, they had a pilot. And it was up in the Klondike. It was Julie Cobb moving up to Alaska, but it wasn't called North Alaska. Jeez, I just saw Julie Cobb the other day. Anyway, I'm sorry. So that was it, and it was a Mort Lockman pilot. That's right, for Norman Lear. So I have very fond memories of Norman Lear, and I just the stuff that he's done for television and for me too, because he'd always give me a break. Sometimes I'd screw it up, but he'd always come back and say, "Give this one a try. Come on," and Mort Lockman too, which was great. Yeah. And so that wasn't the first pilot, but Too Close for Comfort was certainly probably the most successful one because I was getting busy and kind of hot, and I read it and I went, I don't like this. Ted Knight had just come off this huge success on Mary Tyler Moore. And it was Ted Knight raising two girls and all of this stuff. And I thought, I can do better than this. Patsy reads it. My wife reads the script. Goes, this is Ted Knight raising these two girls, teenage girls in the house. This is a funny situation. You ought to think twice about this. So I went in, I took the meeting, and I liked these guys, Arnie Sultan and I can't remember, and they'd written it. And so I said, sure. And it was funny because the casting people were talking about people like Maureen Stapleton will get, or Geraldine Page, or you're going, what? To play Ted Knight's wife? Well, they may need the money, but I don't think they're going to do this. So we got Nancy Dussault, who's a friend, and still is a dear friend, and the couple of cute girls, and it ran 9 years. It ran as Too Close for Comfort for 5, and then became the Ted Knight Show, too. I think he passed away right at the end of the run. I think they could have done another year. But anyway, yeah, that was... And it was a lot of fun to do. That was a lot of fun.
Can you talk about the development of the show? Do you remember much of it?
God, I don't. I mean, I
Were
wasn't...
they trying to get away from the Ted Baxter character?
Yes, and it's so funny. He tried so hard to get away from it, and he couldn't. He wanted to. And I've had this experience with other actors who are really, really good in the one thing that they do. And we talked in the pilot about, I don't want to play Ted Baxter. I'm going to be Ted Knight's father, all of that stuff. And so, but as soon as that audience would come in, you could see that same thing would happen in his voice, and it worked for him. And in the end, it was fine. It was fine. But there's a lot of, and having been an actor, I understood what he was talking about, because you have those little tricks that work for you, and they work for an audience. And even though you'd like to be, I don't know, Alec Guinness or somebody who's going to hide behind, Dustin Hoffman is going to come up with a different character in every movie that he does, or De Niro maybe. It's not. There's a big difference, I think. But I really wasn't involved in the development of the show. We went through some rewrites on the pilot, as I remember, but it was a fabulous experience, and of course the audience just loved him because of Mary Tyler Moore, coming off from that character.
And the breakout character in that was Monroe.
Jim Bullock?
Yeah.
Jim J. Bullock.
Yeah.
Yes, God. I think I did just his first episode, and then I'd left by that time. But then I worked with Jim again on a Linda Lavin series called Conrad Bloom, and he came and did a couple of guest shots on that. But he was huge. But I was long gone by that time. I think I only did the first 6 episodes or something. I did the pilot and the first few, and then left to do other stuff.
Now, I know you did a considerable amount of Family Ties.
I did.
Had you met Gary David Goldberg
yes.
Previous?
Gary David Goldberg wrote, I think, the first episode that I ever did on the Bob Newhart Show. That's what's so interesting. He was a freelance writer, and he had just moved here, and he wrote that. And I know he wrote the episode where I moved my entire travel agency into Carol's desk into the outer office of Bob. So he comes out, and there's palm trees there and all of this stuff, and goes, Carol, what the hell's going on? Oh, Larry's set up his office here. And he wrote that episode, too. So we became sort of bonded over just that history. I never directed any of the Tony Randall series that he produced with Hugh Wilson. And I don't know why, but we never worked together on that. But we all knew each other through MTM, and were friendly. And again, I came in after the show had been running for a year or so on Family Ties, and it all just gelled. It was a relationship that I had with Gary that I immediately felt with Michael Fox and Michael Gross and Meredith, too. It was in the first year because Fox's character hadn't broken out at that point.
What was the premise in the initial premise?
The initial premise was all about these two hippie parents, which is based on Gary and his wife Diana Meehan. And they were the ones with the van, with the Volkswagen van with the pretty stickers and smoking the pot and free love and all this, having a good time and having kids and finally getting married and doing, having life. And suddenly they have their oldest child becomes a total right-wing conservative materialist. And it's just such an adorable premise. Plus, as many of the children who were growing up in those days were, money is so important. I mean, I talked to a friend of mine the other day. He's going to college. What does he want? I don't know, but he wants to make money. And it was this big deal at the time, this was in the 80s, of how important it was to make money and how important it was to be a conservative and basically a Republican. And here's his hippie Democratic parents. So, and the country just took to Michael Fox, and plus the fact that he was the size that he was, and he had the chutzpah that he has, and just is this unbelievably appealing young actor.
Now, did you have a contract on Family Ties?
No, never did. Never, always just freelanced. But I'd pretty well know, I think I did a lot of them for 4 years. And I was, I think, mostly their main director. And then I went off to do other stuff after that. But he, we did some fantastic, we did one of the funniest episodes ever on that show that I was breaking up in the booth even when we were rolling. But Meredith was actually pregnant with twins, and she couldn't do about 6 episodes. So we hired Gina Davis to fill in, to kind of be a nanny. And it was her first episode, and she, Michael Gross and Michael Fox were interviewing possible nannies. And we had that, I can't remember her name either, but the lady who did Throw Mama from the Train with Danny DeVito, played his mom.
Mm-hmm. Ann Ramsey?
Ann Ramsey, very good. Was our neighbor, in fact. So she was interviewed, Then Bobby Costanza came in as a big, heavy Italian guy. He's going to be interviewed. No. Michael Gross is exhausted, goes to bed. It says to Michael Fox, you just interview whoever and whomever you want to hire, you think, I trust you. And he goes to bed. Knock, knock at the door. Gina Davis shows up. It's twice his size. And that's the end of the teaser, of Michael Fox at 5'2", looking up at Gina Davis, 6 feet. And, you're hired. And she couldn't do anything. And everything she did went wrong in the set. And again, we were a farce. It was a total farce. But you believed it because she was hired because she was so gorgeous. But she couldn't. The refrigerator broke and the ice machine broke. And so, of course, when they opened the ice machine, piles of ice comes down and Michael gets buried in ice. We went to every sight gag. The toaster broke and he's got English muffins in the toaster, and with no reason at all, we tipped the toaster on its side, which was totally unreal, but we believed that Gina Davis had tried to put it up on the side, and the English muffins went shooting across the frame, and Michael Fox couldn't get through the line of, if this had been a Pop-Tart, I'd be dead now. And he thought that was the funniest thing he'd ever heard. And they kept laughing, and the cast kept laughing, and the crew kept laughing, and we couldn't get the lines out. It just was, it was, I can't remember that, but every farcical thing we could do, sight gag, we did in that, but it was grounded because we had a totally incompetent nanny. And she did 6 episodes. In fact, we ended up hiring her to do Sarah. We did kind of a lawyer series, and with that same character who became a lawyer, and we knew that Gina was wonderful at comedy. She was so gorgeous and pretty, but we couldn't believe she could be as funny as she was, and she was absolutely great. So we did that.
Can you describe a typical work week on Family Ties?
Family Ties? Mm-hmm. Well, I'm trying to. It's a long time ago, Gary. We had a Monday reading. Those were the days where you'd really have a 5-day good work week. And Gary was as gracious as he is, but a real disciplinarian. And it was terrific. He kept everybody in shape. And it was difficult at the end of that year because Meredith and Michael, who were contracted to be the stars, realized that their position was being supplanted by Michael Fox's unbelievable rise to fame. But because of that, and also the Cosby Show, we were a humongous hit. So everybody was happy, but there was, that going on. A Monday, we would come in and read the script, and they would have gotten the script usually over the weekend. And they'd come in and we'd read the script in front of the network and the studio and everybody. And then the actors would go off to their rooms and we'd get notes from the studio and the network. And Gary, as I remember, was very gracious about taking the notes and writing them down and either discarding them if he didn't like them but he had a great relationship with Brandon Tartikoff, who was head of NBC at the time, and Gary Nardino, who was running Paramount too, and they were in his corner. So we had a good thing going, and then we'd rehearse a Monday, sort of break the back of it. I'd go back to the office, tell him what was wrong with the script, which is interesting because they would start telling me stuff that they wouldn't tell Gary. I find this with a lot of actors. If you can get them to trust you, they're sort of shy of the executive producer, but they will tell the director as a father figure, psychologist, confidant kind of thing, I'm having trouble with this line. So I'd go back to the office Monday afternoon and tell them, and they'd be writing. We'd get a new script on Tuesday. Everybody would read the script again, and they'd see it Tuesday afternoon for the first time. And we'd see a run-through. And the chairs would be out, but it would just be the writer-producers, maybe 6 or 8 of them. And then Gary would gather everybody around this little table in the living room and go around to every single actor and say, what are your problems? He would never, as I remember, criticize the actors or the directing in front of anybody, but he'd want to know, what are your problems with the script? And they'd tell him, after a while. And he'd say, the script isn't working, it's our fault, we'll fix it. You hear this over and over. If it ain't on the page, it ain't on the stage. And he would take their notes, go back, and he'd invite me to go with them. And I would love that. And it was a great experience because as a director, you go back to the rewrite, you find out, first of all, what they really think of the actors and what their problems are. So you can kind of do some more insightful directing that you might not do on your own. And also, they've changed the line. You know why they've changed the line. So if Michael Gross is challenging me on, I know why that line has changed. I was in the room when that happened. So in those days, I would stay till 11, 12 o'clock at night. They'd work till 2, 3 in the morning making the script right. Just making it right. So then the same process, Wednesday, they'd listen to the reading. If they stayed late, they wouldn't hear the reading, and I would read it with the actors. I always like to read it in the morning at the table, talk about it, stage it again, and then do a run-through in the afternoon. And they would make criticisms, do the same process, and then I would go off with my assistant director and set the camera shots Wednesday night. So we would work out what the shots are. And during the day, Wednesday, when I'm directing, I also make little notes in my margin as to, this looks good on this angle, this is a good close-up, this is a good 2-shot, what do I have? And then I sit with the AD, and we go through that, and he, or she in that case, it was ladies, they make up a whole thing, and then they'll meet with the crew early Thursday morning at 8 o'clock, and they give them all their camera shots. And so the crew has a little camera card, each camera, A, B, C, and D, X, we call it. Or I guess in the tape it was camera 1, 2, 3, 4. Anyway, they have their camera cards, and they put them on their right below their viewfinders. And so we would go through the show, scene by scene, slowly, and then we would do a run-through in front of Gary and the writers on Thursday afternoon. Once in a while, we'd tape something if it involved, like the little boy, when the little boy was very, very young, Brian, or if there was a special effect, we might. But most of the time, we would shoot on Friday afternoon, and this is where we got into block and shoot, rather than two audiences, which we found not a big help. He knew what he liked, and they were great about laughing. So we would come in and I think start shooting around 12 o'clock, and we'd shoot from 12 to 4:30. We'd get the whole show in the can. And Meredith would love this, Meredith Baxter. Michael Fox would do it because he had to do it, because he loved the audience. Meredith loved the non-audience. but we could use both later. And then we'd make some changes at supper time, and then go out and shoot a show, and bam, we'd maybe start at 7 and always be done by 8:30, 9. We'd do each scene twice. And Gary made it an occasion. He gave flowers to people. I don't know if he told you this. I know you interviewed him recently. But he'd give us all the men got red roses they'd put in the lapel. I wore a coat, sometimes a tie in those days. It was so great. He would always wear a jacket on the floor. And he was there, and he was the daddy. And I would shoot in the booth, but as the scene was over, I'd come out, talk to the actors, he'd do such and such, so-and-so, and then go back. We'd do it once more, and that would be it. Because we'd have it in the afternoon also. So, and then take people to his favorite restaurant, or it was down in Melrose afterwards. It was probably for being an A-quality show, probably one of the happiest experiences of my life.
Now, I understand that Michael J. Fox sort of saved his performance for that audience.
He did and he didn't. I mean, he was always, I could always go back and use something that he had in the afternoon. If I had a boom shadow at night, or if there was some camera problem or something like that at night, I could always count on using him at night. We did, the most famous one we did, or that I did anyway, was My Name is Alex, which was ended up to be a two-parter. And
okay, you were talking about My Name is Alex, that episode. That was a two-part episode?
Two-part. Got a DGA award for that, and an Emmy nomination. It was a great experience. I'd left Family Ties. I was directing, I can't remember, it was Day by Day for Gary and Sarah for Gary. Anyway, but he asked me to come back. His parents had both died within 6 months of each other. And he wanted to do a thing about death, and he did this wonderful show, where Michael is supposed to help his friend move a piano, and he doesn't, and the friend gets killed. And Michael Fox goes through this tremendous guilt thing. And so the run-through on Tuesday, which was fabulous, was like 8 and 10 minutes long. And he looks at the script, Gary, and he wrote it himself, and he said, there's no way I can do this in a half an hour, or 23 minutes, whatever it was in those days, 25 minutes. So he calls Brandon Tartikoff on the phone Tuesday and says, can we have an hour? Absolutely. Gives him an hour, just like that. And so we go back, and he writes, the writers pitched in, and they write whatever it would be, 52-minute show. And he calls Fox on the phone and says, can you learn this? And he starts telling him what he's going to do, and he's going to go to a psychiatrist, and he's going to see a priest and a minister and a family friend and all of this. And so Michael says, absolutely. And then he tells me about it. Well, it just was double the work, but the crew was so behind it, the cast was so behind it, it just was phenomenal. But we did shoot all of it that afternoon, that Friday afternoon. We started at 12, and we never got into any extra time. And he went up a few times, Fox, and in the afternoon. And then that evening, I think it was that evening that we all realized Michael J. Fox is a special human being and a special actor, because he pulls stuff out that night that I've just had never seen in him before. And it was truly exciting, and the audience was absolutely overwhelmed. We all were. And the fact that we got through it really without stopping, I think. And there were a couple of scenes that went on for a long period of time.
You kind of forget that there's a studio audience, even for that second part.
Yeah.
And that there are jokes in it.
I know. I haven't seen it in so long.
It's not just straight drama.
When he's doing that. And some of that stuff, God, I'd planned, but it just kind of fell in, with camera operator helping, and we had the best camera crew on that show, and an operator saying, if I just move this over through this window, we'll see the teacher in the background, and Michael Fox will be in the foreground, and intentionally we wanted to give it that sort of old Playhouse 90 Delbert Mann kind of feeling that we were doing a live old-fashioned show, which, oh, geez. And that's still, I'm so proud of that show. And Gary's writing, it was such a group effort. The stage manager, Andy, was such a help to me. And Paul Basta, who was, excuse me, one of the camera operators on that, who does a wonderful shot very low on the ground, and he pans around to the whole family on a very low angle, which was his idea. You know, that's part of directing, I think, is everybody pitching in, and it still ends up saying directed by Will Mackenzie. But you get help from the actors, God knows. You get great help from the writers. You get help from your crew, that they're all there to make the show the best possible show they can. Because it behooves everybody. It's going to run a long time. They're going to pay their bills. They're going to.
And how unusual was that kind of material at that time?
Unusual. Oh, very, very unusual. And that's why I have to tell you one Gary Goldberg story. I was doing. I was on the set of an episode of Andy Richter Rules the Universe, just doing it with my friend Andy Ackerman, and. It's a single camera show, and we're setting up a shot. I got a call. The phone page comes over. Do you know a Gary Goldberg? He's interrupting, you know. So I said, yeah, I know Gary. Can you take a call from? Sure. And we were set up. Excuse me. He said, Will, I was turning on the Comedy Channel last night. There were 4 family ties in a row, and you directed all 4 of them. He said, they were so good. The pace was so good that he used to say, well blocked, because he loved the way I'd stage things in certain ways, because I really do a lot of homework on that kind of stuff. But just to say that, and this is 20 years later or whatever it is, and you know, you'd think it maybe at the time, wow, those were really good shows. I got to call Will. He actually did it. And he calls my agent. My agent said, well, he's out directing this. Well, do you have a number over there? Yeah, he's at Paramount. He's on stage 20, blah, blah, blah. And he did it. That's Gary Goldberg in a nutshell, because he just is so proud of his work and his people's work, you know. And I was definitely a Gary Goldberg person.
What was the reaction to "Hey, My Name Is Alex"?
It's phenomenal. You mean for the audience?
Yeah.
Or? The audience that night. The audience that night was in awe, and it got a standing ovation, and they were applauding everybody. I mean, the whole cast was phenomenal. So that night, and I think it got I still have it on my wall. It got a special thing in TV Guide as this special episode, and I think Gary and Michael both won their Emmys for that. For Michael's performance in that. And I think that was the first one that he'd actually won, and Gary too for that writing. So I think the reaction was fantastic, and also for having been a 1-hour show. I think lately they've shown, when you know, they did break it up into 2 half hours, you know, but because most of the time you can't take the full hour. But it was great.
There was no commercial interruption for the second?
I think so. I think that was the deal. Yeah, no commercial interruption. But that's again because Gary had this wonderful relationship with Brandon Tartikoff, and who was a phenomenal head of studio. He just was, again, like Grant Tinker, a very accessible, caring human being. Yeah.
And I wanted to ask about the individual actors and have you say a word or two.
Yes.
Working with Meredith Baxter Birney.
I adore Meredith Baxter Birney. I cannot say enough about her. We did a series together. I did a pilot with her called The Faculty, which unfortunately was the same year that the Drew Carey show came out. So it was our show or theirs. We did 13 episodes or something. But she is an absolutely lovely, wonderful actress. She tells this joke herself, but Meredith. I said, Meredith laughs at a joke 3 times. First of all, when she hears the joke. Second, when you explain it to her. And third, when she understands it. And she knows that. But the great thing with Meredith is she's so grounded. I mean, she will not do something unless it's right for that character. And God bless her for it. And if you want her to open an icebox that was filled with ice that comes out. She wants to know why and what's the reason and all of that. And that's why she is fabulous. I mean, she's lovely to look at, but has a wonderful, realistic approach, and is a lovely human being who has, I think, 5 kids, and they're all grown up now. But I haven't seen her in several years. But anyway, I loved her. I love Michael Gross. Michael Gross, again, like Meredith, questions a lot, and I love that in actors. A lot of directors don't want that. You know, come on, let's just get on with it. What's my motivation? Your motivation is your big paycheck on Friday. Well, the best actors are the ones who, they make sense, and they may not, you may not as an audience understand why they care so much about the icebox opening up or whatever the problem is at the time, but that makes that actor comfortable. And so if he's comfortable inside, he'll do your bidding and he'll do your comedy. So Michael came from the stage, you know, which is where I came from too. So he was great, and Justine was gorgeous and going through a lot of growing up at the time, teenage and boyfriends and all sorts of stuff, but boy, she learned a lot, and she became such a wonderful actress on that show. They gave her so many silly things to do as that character, but innately she's a very, very bright young lady. And Tina, whom I hadn't seen, Tina Yothers, I hadn't seen her in 20 years since I saw her on the Today Show the other day, and I said to Patsy, who the heck is that? That's Tina Yothers. And my God, she's what a 35-year-old woman now, I guess, you know. And all I knew is that she'd had a band after, and that was the end. And so I wonder, who's that adult? And there it is. So she grew up, and we talked about Michael Fox. So.
And in terms of his rise to fame, at what point was there a palpable point during that first year where you realized that the show would be shifting?
Because of the fan mail.
Yeah.
The fan mail was unbelievable that was coming in, and he was going to be on the lunchbox. You know, Gary talks about whether it was Warren Littlefield or somebody at NBC saying, no, he'll never be, we don't want him. We want to, either after the pilot was shot, you know, I'm sure he told you the story of Judith Weiner wanting him and Gary never saying, no, we'll get Matthew Broderick, we'll get somebody better. So there's always somebody out there who's going to be better. Well, Gary finally gets in his corner. They do the pilot, and then one of the networks said, oh no, we have to replace Michael Fox. And you go, what? Yeah, he's not going to be a lunchbox character, somebody whose face is going to be on the teenage lunchbox. Well, my God, every teenager in America, either the boys wanted to be Michael Fox or the girls wanted to be in love with Michael Fox. And it just was, so this mail starts coming in about, we want to see more of Alex. We want to know more about Alex. So you know, they had to, and the network was pressuring Gary a lot.
And how was that handled by you and Gary and others?
Oh, I think, I mean, it wasn't really for me, but it was handled beautifully. There was obviously friction. Michael Gross and Meredith were the sweetest people in the world, but they could see that what they were told was going to be a story about parents, where the parents were going to be shifted to the background in a sense, and it was going to be about Alex Keaton dealing with his sisters and dealing with making money and doing all of this stuff. And this is, and it was, I would say, a little tense. The end of the first year is when I came in, and it got that way, maybe the beginning of the set. But then everybody accepted it, and it was so phenomenal that they were a part of a team. And I think everybody realized that this is the way we're going to stay ahead, and this is the way we're going to stay afloat. So let him do it. And Michael Fox was very gracious about it, because, you know, I was there when he was shooting Back to the Future at the night. You know, we'd get him, because that was our deal, but the man was exhausted. I mean, we'd get him from 9 in the morning until 3 in the afternoon. We'd try to let him come in late or go, but then he'd jump in a limousine at 4 o'clock and head over to Universal and work for Steven for whatever until 3 in the morning and get 3 or 4 hours of sleep, and there he'd be right with us. But you could see after a while it was taking its toll. And then then he gave me the Family Ties movie to direct, which was a farce. But here's poor Michael shooting this 2-hour, it was awful, and Gary's the first to admit it. The script was terrible, the direction was terrible. Nobody was taking it seriously. It was a chance to go to England and have a good time with everybody and get paid. But here's Michael doing this terrible movie of the week. Family Ties goes to London while his huge hit is opening to phenomenal success in the United States, and he can't be there. And oh God, I felt so bad for him. But then Family Ties movie goes on TV and it's like the highest rated movie in the world. And we're going, oh my God, I directed that. Oh, Gary, we wrote that. Oh, it was anyway. So we didn't do any more of those. Yeah. We're best in our living room. We're best in our kitchen. That's where Family Ties belong.
You were mentioning blocking as an important aspect to the way you approach shows. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
I'm a big one for physicalization. I learned this from Sandy Meisner. I mean, physical behavior is a very, very important thing to an actor. I mean, a lot of amateurs, they're like, they don't know what to do with their hands, you know. And this, to me, and there's a lot of times you should have your arms folded. I'm guarded. I'm a little on the defensive. I don't want you to ask me too many personal questions, therefore. But you're not thinking that totally. But what are you doing with your hands? That's why I want the cast to get the script out of their hands as soon as possible, because if I don't know them, I want to know what's their physical behavior. And then, why are they where they are? And in a sitcom, I think you need that energy. And the energy is moving around the kitchen. That's the perfect example. Meredith would do this on her own because she's a mother of 5 children, had a husband. She's used to shopping. She's used to coming in. And after a while, that would be our shorthand of, Meredith, you'll do something here. And she'll say to the prop man, I'd like 2 bags of groceries, and I'd like some grapefruits, and I'd like a couple of bananas, and I'd like something to take to the fridge, and I'll peel a potato, and she'd do it. And this is what Sandy Meisner called independent activity. This is an activity that is independent of the dialogue that you're talking about. And the example that I use is in The Apartment, Jack Lemmon movie, Billy Wilder. I don't know if you're familiar with that, but the girl tries to commit suicide, and he's revived her, and in the next scene, he is straining spaghetti through a tennis racket. And all he can find in his apartment is a tennis racket. So he's doing something totally silly, but they're talking about suicide. And we could have a serious conversation, and Meredith's peeling a potato or peeling an onion and crying or something like that, so that's why Gary would say, oh, that's really well blocked, because if you have a joke, you want them to be in the lens. You don't necessarily have to have a close-up on them, but you want them to be, or if they're talking about their bad knee, you have to see the knee in the shot, and you want it to be front and center. Without looking front and center. So that's the trick. And I found the more I started doing a little single camera in those days, I went off and got an episode of Scarecrow and Mrs. King and Remington Steele and stuff, and I didn't know a lot about single camera. But I found when I came back to the 4-camera, my pictures were better. I was getting better at staging proscenium 4-camera shows because of that. But no, I did. I do a tremendous amount of homework, and that's one of the reasons I'm pretty much retired now. But it's just those late nights, and you're working till late. Then you want to prepare for the next day, and you want to block it out. You want to know, even on Scrubs, a lot of it will fall into place. But I want to have those ideas. If nobody else has something better, I want to have something going. And so when I was doing Family Ties, I would really, really block it out. And when they trust you, they let you. What do you want to do here, Will? How do you think this? Who's on the sofa? Who's behind? Who moves? Who doesn't move? And don't give moves that are arbitrary. Just make it motivated. Why would I go to the window? Why am I going to sit here?
Okay, I want to move on to moonlighting.
Yes.
You did 4 episodes of Moonlighting. How did you?
I think I did more, but a lot of them are combined. We have these.
Yeah, I think one of them was even co-credited.
Co-credited, and we decided not to do that after a while. I did more than that, I think, but it always looked funny when it had co-credits. Either I replaced so-and-so or somebody replaced me or whatever. What really happened, they had a joke on Moonlighting. There wasn't a director's chair, there was a director's bench. And because you would sign up to do other shows. You know, you're scheduled to do Moonlighting April 10 through April 27. Well, you're halfway through the Moonlighting and it's April 26th, and you're not going to finish that Moonlighting because you have a Remington Steele to go to, and they stay on schedule. Every other show did, but Moonlighting just went and went and went. So that's why we decided whoever did the most work on the show got the credit for the episode. But my first episode was got a nomination. It also won a DGA award. It was called My Fair David, and it was where she bets him, I don't know, $100 that he can't act. You know, he's making fools of her, and he can't act like a man. And it's based on My Fair Lady and Pygmalion and all that. So she's trying to mold him into a responsible adult, and of course he is unmoldable. And it was a great episode. I think one of the reasons it was successful for me on Moonlighting is that because of 4-camera, I think on my feet, and I'm able to. If you gave me a script right now and I read it, I would be able to stage it. It may not be the best if I had a week, but I could do it. And luckily, Sybil and Bruce could learn these lines unbelievably fast, and they were getting along very well the first couple of seasons, and we'd rehearse it, we'd read it, we'd talk about it for 5 minutes, 10 minutes, we'd block it, and then they'd go off to their makeup and hair trailer, they'd learn it, and I would do it with stand-ins and maybe change the blocking a little bit with the cinematographer, Jerry Finnerman, and we'd just have it done. And so that was one of the reasons I think that I personally worked out, because I didn't have to think a lot and plan weeks ahead. But I learned how to do stunts on that show. I had a great stunt coordinator, Chris Howell, and Jay Daniel, who was the line producer, was also a wonderful help as a director. So he gave me a lot of ideas. And the best thing was I wormed my way into the actors' hearts, which I think is a very important thing to do in the beginning. When you're new, I met Sybil the first day on the show, and same with Bruce. But Jeff Bleckner, a wonderful director, a friend of mine, had said, if you're a little bit new and you're working on the show for the first time, come up with something that you think the actor will like and give them a piece of business or something like that. So I did for Sybil. She had to tell a joke. She wasn't comfortable, and we worked it out. Without my knowing it, the next scene was with Bruce, and she had gone to Bruce and said, I think this guy really is good with actors. I think he knows what he's doing. Give him a chance. And so Bruce did, and I gave him a really good piece of business, which he loved. And from then on, it was like, oh, good, Will's back, that kind of thing.
What was the business that you gave Bruce Willis?
I can't even remember. I was trying to hold up a trophy, or it was something to do with him jumping up on a desk and blocking it that way, so that he could jump up on the desk, and could we shoot him? Was there a ceiling? It's all of those kind of things. You think you got this great piece of business, and the cinematographer says, sorry, I can't shoot him like that. I got no ceiling, shit. But I don't remember.
And Sybil telling the joke, but that's part of the script that she tells.
The duck. It was about the duck. No, it was just how she moved. And the fact that she moved the way she did, it helped her learn the joke. And so she liked that, rather than standing still or doing any of that stuff. It's not being afraid of actors. Unfortunately, I think a lot of directors, especially if they have a reputation, the actors, the stars, they kind of, let me just let you do whatever you want to do. They don't want that there. They are as scared as the rest of us. They just show it in a different way. And I think everybody who has temperamental problems or other problems is, they're nervous, they're scared, they want help in a way, but you have to figure out, how can I help you? How can I father you? How can I mother you? How can I be your helpmate here. I am out to make this show, and you look as good as you possibly can. So let me in, let me help. Sometimes they don't need help. I mean, a lot of times, I will say that, if I'm doing a pilot, we always talk about how important it is to do what makes you comfortable. And like, you go into the 5th year of Taxi, you're not telling Judd Hirsch how to play that character, or Michael Fox at that point. But if you're in a pilot, you're there, and most actors hopefully will have lots of questions. I want questions. I don't want a fight on my hands. I can't deal under those circumstances, but I can. I like the whys, and also they provoke me too. I mean, I'll change my mind on something. I'll change staging. I'll change.
Now, when Moonlighting went on and the actors, there was some friction. What logistical problems did that cause? I know they didn't spend a lot of time in scenes together.
But they did in the beginning. The first year I was there the first year and the second year, and I think I came back, I think it was the third year to do the Shakespeare show, but they were getting along great. I mean, she really helped him get that job. You know, I can't remember who, Bob Urich or somebody. The network wanted somebody gorgeous and handsome to play opposite Sybil Shepherd, who's gorgeous, beautiful. And Glenn was the one that found Bruce Willis. You know, he'd done Miami Vice and was a bartender at Cafe Central. And here's this, I don't know, he was balding and sort of Jack Nicholson-y and, you know, evil and male. And so they were very close at the beginning. And I think Sybil had the screen test with him, and she didn't have necessarily approval, but, you know, you knew that you wanted her to like him and all this. And she did. You know, they got along absolutely great that first year. And I think, you know, I don't want to get too deep into it, but I think a lot of it was Bruce is a guy's guy. I mean, he you know, was doing the cigars, and he loved the dirty joke. And a lot of it was a very male set, very male-oriented set. We had a female script supervisor who kind of went with the flow, and I think we had makeup and hair were women. But otherwise, and Elise Beasley, who was driven crazy by this, and so was Sybil, that this, you know, you'd get on there and you'd hear dirty language or dirty jokes, and it got to her, and she was going through divorce. She was going to marry her chiropractor at the time, Dr. Bruce. There was a lot personal, I think, in her life too. But I adore her. She ended up hiring me for a movie of the week that I directed, that she produced, which was a very, very pleasant experience, and she was lovely. I love them both, and I just know it just got to the point where there was just too much friction, and then Sybil and Karen had quite a bit of friction that last final season.
I wanted to mention a couple more things about Moonlighting. One was the slamming doors was part of the show. Yeah. Did that present problems?
Oh yeah, because the door always broke. The door constantly, I swear, every day we had to have a carpenter on the set with that door, because that damn door that went in, that double door that went in from the outer office into Sybil's office, they would bam that thing, and within an hour it would be off. And so that was
and when they slammed the door, there was somebody there that made sure it didn't.
Yes. And sometimes you'd see the hand, or the little hand or something like that. It would be a second AD or a prop person or something like that. I can't remember, but no, that door. You reminded me of that. Yeah, it was a huge problem.
Another thing I did was dialogue scenes in the car, but these were done. These were not processed. You were doing them on the street.
Oh no, and that was the one way to get pages done, was because we didn't have any of the logistical part. We'd shoot in the car, and they would have sometimes just gotten there. But we had 3 cameras rolling usually. We'd have 2 singles on them, and either a cross shot or a master 2-shot or something like that. And we'd drive around, and they would do the dialogue, and we'd get more work done in the car than we did on the set or anything, because they were there. They were in there. They were, you know, they couldn't stop and argue or anything like that. It was.
And how was the sound collected? How did you make sure that you didn't have any?
We had no problem with this. I'm pretty sure they were radio mics. I'm pretty sure that was the way. And you know, pace on that show, again, that was one of the reasons I loved it, is that usually it's usually a minute, maybe a little bit less than a minute a page. And we were doing 30 seconds a page. You know, they were overlapping each other so much. And that's why we always had to have the off-camera person mic'd as well as the on-camera, because they did not like to wait until that person finished their thought. They, bam, as soon as, and which is so real life, but it kept the vitality of that series going, that constant pace that, and Glenn insisted on that. Just saying, moonlighting story, I was thinking of I thought I was being fired the first day because two things. You could not use a zoom on that show. Everything had to be a prime lens, dolly on everything. And the first day, the cinematographer said, they'll never know, but we can sneak in a zoom with this dolly and you'll get a great shot going into Sybil's face here. The next day they see dailies, I'm called into the office. Did you use a zoom on this yet? Yeah. But it's only a little, shoot it again. And I had to go back and reshoot it. And also the very first morning I had the villains in this show and nobody was around, no producers or anything. So I just shot them straight on. And he said, oh, no. You got to have low POV. It's got to be more danger for this. So they made me shoot my first scene over again and the famous dolly zoom shot with Sybil. And I never, ever again tried to use a zoom.
Who didn't want the zoom and why?
Jay Daniel and Glenn Caron. Because he just feels with the zoom, you know, it shrinks the background. It just is crazy. He wants the whole camera going in. And I had done this. The old Bob Newhart show, there were no zooms on those cameras, you know. And so when you finish those shows with three cameras, 3-camera film, 35 millimeter shows, you had so many tape marks of where the dolly grip, you know, every time he'd get a new mark, he'd put a piece of tape on the floor. This is scene 3, this is my 4th mark. And then he'd have a flashlight while the scene was going on, and he'd find his other mark. Now, Bob's going to get up and cross. You're going to go to your 5th mark. Boom, tape over there. And by the time you finish a half-hour show, this stage looks like spaghetti. I mean, it's got so many tape marks. And this is the same on Moonlighting, but it was single camera. So there was a lot of dollying.
Now, you directed the Shakespeare episode of
I did.
Moonlighting. Now, did you? What was your experience with Shakespeare just in your lifetime up to that
My
point?
mom was a Shakespeare professor, and I think Glenn knew that. I used to joke that we used to go around the house speaking iambic pentameter, but we didn't. But I had studied a lot of Shakespeare's plays in college. I was an English major, and I'd acted in many of Shakespeare's plays. And he called me. I was doing a thing with Barry Kemp at the time called The Popcorn Kid. And in the middle, Glenn calls and says, I'm doing a special Shakespeare episode. It's difficult, but I'd love you to read it and see if you want to do it. And so I loved it, of course, and went to Barry and said, I'd like to get out to do this. And he let me out, and it was a great experience. Sybil had never done Shakespeare in her life, either had Bruce. I mean, you know, and the two of them, again, approached it with tremendous enthusiasm and love and challenge, and the crew loved the idea. And it was, who was running ABC? But anyway, he told me it was the most expensive hour of television up until just a few years ago. He was our champion who kept Moonlighting on because the show was winning.
Stoddard?
Brandon Stoddard, exactly. Little white-haired guy. Yes, he has an island. He lives on an island up in Maine. Anyway, yeah, he was great, and he, I think, kept it, because sometimes the ratings weren't so good, but it was getting awards. You know, it was winning awards, and it was getting a lot of its own acclaim. And so, in spite of the fact that it wasn't a ratings winner at the time, he still would keep it on. So anyway.
Okay, well, we're at the end of this tape, so
we are.
let's stop.